Hello, everyone. This is Yemi Yarunsi. Some people call me Yummy, 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 Yummy. Well, welcome to All Alike Onto Him podcast, where we explore the human connection, faith, hope, and the human spirit of togetherness. Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to the All Are Alike Onto Him podcast. My name is Yemi Yarunsi. This is the first episode of this amazing podcast. I try to stay humble, actually. It is going to be an okay podcast. Hopefully, you get some value from this. But thank you so much for being here. Today, I have with me Alma. Alma is a great friend. Alma, do you just want to introduce yourself real quick?
All right. Certainly. My name is Alma Ohene-Opare. I am an immigrant here in the United States. I originally from Ghana, so not too far from you.
Yeah. Added context. My background, I'm Nigerian as well, so very, very, very close to.
Yeah, healthy rivalry.
Yes.
Between the two. So I am originally from Ghana. I actually came to the United States for the first time as a missionary, called to serve in the California Los Angeles mission.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my getting into America story. And after my mission, I ended up going to BYU, and I have lived in America pretty much since that time. So I'm married. I have 4 kids, and I currently work in technology.
Oh, that's amazing. I've never been to Ghana before, but I've heard so many great things about Ghana, and I want to visit Ghana so much. The last time I was in Nigeria was 2002. That was when I first moved to the United States. And I haven't been back since then, which it's a travesty. I really think. Have you been back since?
I have.
Yeah.
I have been to Ghana a few times.
Okay.
Well, first, I went home to get married.
Oh, wow.
So I
Nice.
went home in 2006 to get married to my wife, and then since then I've gone about 4 times.
Oh, wow.
Since then. And I was just going to say one thing. I am, out of 5 kids, I am the only one who ended up marrying someone from Ghana.
Oh, wow.
I have 3 siblings who are married to Nigerians.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Yeah,
Niger.
2 sisters,
Yeah.
sisters, and my little brother is married to a Nigerian. So
That's amazing. And did they all live here, or are they back in Africa?
all 3 of them are back in Ghana.
Okay.
Currently, I have a brother who lives in Idaho with his wife.
Okay.
Yep.
Wow, that's amazing. That's really good to know, and I'm glad to find that out. Really, so one of the things that people always talk about is you go everywhere, Nigerian jollof or Ghanaian jollof rice, which is
there is no debate.
Yeah,
Ghana jollof is the winner. There's no debate.
The compromise that I make, I end up just saying Senegalese is probably the best, and then everyone just keeps quiet there.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's a happy medium, right?
Mm-hmm.
So. But no, that's really great. And we're both members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And one of the reasons why, I wanted to really start this podcast was a lot of times you don't see a lot of representation from African members of the church in terms just in the social media space or podcast space. And I thought this was a great avenue to really dive into the community, right? There's a lot of members of the church that are of African descent, or in Africa, maybe in the United States, that are of African descent, and really sharing those stories with people and showing that the church is strong. Testimony in Africa is very strong, and I'm just happy to have the opportunity to share different stories, and our stories, my story, as a convert as well. So I'm really excited about this.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So really this episode, I really wanted to touch on one of the really great African stories of the church, really looking at pioneers that really drove a lot of the testimony in Black Africa. And really when just diving into that topic is I do have the story of an amazing person, a really amazing individual from Africa. When people hear about pioneers in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, a lot of people think about Brigham Young. They think about, Joseph Smith.
Hand carts.
Yeah, all that. Yeah, exactly. And little is known about Anthony Obinna. It's an obscure name in among members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or maybe amongst those outside of Africa or maybe
Mhm.
Nigeria per se. But however, like Anthony Obinna holds a very important role in the genesis and growth of the church in Black Africa. Um, I don't know. Have you heard about Obinna, like kind of growing
Yes,
up? And yeah.
many years ago, the church released a documentary called Pioneers of Africa.
Mhm.
So that's where I was introduced to Anthony Obinna and his story.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's amazing. So, like, and just to kind of set the stage for listeners out there, Anthony Obinna was at the time, was a 48-year-old assistant to the local headmaster back in a small village in Nigeria, and he was the first baptism in Africa after the priesthood ban was lifted. His story is that of perseverance and plain determination. Really, in this episode, I want to talk about what had to happen for this to take place in a little known village in Nigeria. And setting the stage for everyone, in 1965, Anthony Obinna had a few dreams that were very unique. In this dream, he had, and he kind of shared his story. He was visited by a personage, and the personage showed him a beautiful building. Fast forward later in his life, he was reading a copy of the September 1958 Reader's Digest, in which he saw a picture of this same building. And he also said in the year 1965, and I'm going to quote him here, he said, "I was visited in my dream by a tall and majestic man who carries a walking stick in his right hand. The personage had directed him to read Bunyan's A Pilgrim's Progress again. So after several months, that same personage appeared to him in another dream. And this time, it took him to a beautiful building and showed him everything inside. Later again, multiple dreams, same personage came back over and over. So at the time, there was a civil war in Nigeria. And during that civil war, while he was confined to his house for his safety, he began to read an old copy of the Reader's Digest and discovered an article entitled The March of the Mormons. And he had never heard the word Mormon before. But right there before his eyes was the same building he had seen in his dream. Any idea, thoughts about what that building was?
I have a little bit of inside
Oh,
information, so
okay. Yeah.
I know the answers to that
Yeah.
question.
Yeah. So the Salt Lake City Temple,
Mhm.
right? Yeah. Can you imagine what was going through his mind, that transformative experience of you've had a dream over and over? I mean, you read a book, you see
Mhm.
a picture, and then it's the same building that you saw in your dream. I mean, what do you think of that? Like how
I'm
uh,
just thinking of the Salt Lake Temple. Of
yeah.
course, we understand how unique that temple is with respect to architecture
Mhm, mhm.
and everything. So the building is unique enough that it will stand out to a person, especially growing up in Africa
Yeah.
where, similar buildings
Yeah.
were nowhere to
Yeah.
be found.
Yeah.
And so that's something that would be very interesting to try to understand. What are these spires for? Why is this building, so
Yeah.
ornate so I would think that it would be something that would impress on your mind a significance
Yeah.
of the building.
Yeah.
And then to see that same building in real life.
Yeah.
I can imagine how all that comes together. It probably felt surreal for
Yeah.
him to say, I had this dream. And I can imagine that, connection when you see the picture, like, I've seen this before.
Yeah.
And then remember that I saw it in my dream.
Yeah.
I can imagine how he felt. Because a lot of times we look at our dreams as, things that just happen and we don't place a lot of significance
Yeah.
on dreams. But in this case, being able to see something like that definitely probably shook him a little bit.
Yeah, there was a talk I was listening to, actually watching. It was a devotional by Elder Bednar, and he was talking about personal revelation, and he talked about how and it was a long devotional, but he got to a point where he was talking about revelation and how sometimes revelation differs by peoples or by location
Mhm.
and things like that. And he mentioned an experience where, he has met like African saints where he's heard stories about African saints like walking down the street and they see someone and they're like, "Hey, I had this revelation that I was gonna, meet you or like something about this encounter." And he's like, it's not uncommon to hear of like, people in Africa having these kind of like revelations. And he's like, but I've never heard those kind of things from like missionaries in Los Angeles, right? And just really driving on
Mhm.
some of those how personal revelation comes to different people, different ways. So
Yeah,
that's yeah.
definitely. I think our God is personal, and He uses means that are conducive to the
Yeah.
recipients of His message, right? And so, if you have a culture that that believes that God communicates through dreams
Hmm.
and so on, then that's probably
Yeah.
the mechanism He's going to
Yeah.
use in order to get His message
Yeah.
across. And so, I believe that God speaks to us in, as He has said in the Book of Mormon, the language that we
Yeah.
understand, and not just a physical speaking language, but also in the mode or process or the methodology that we're
Yeah.
most likely um, to be receptive to.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I agree. And kind of driving back into like Anthony's story here, Anthony Obinna, so after seeing that image of the temple in the book, he got so excited, right? Sharing this revelation with his brothers and with his brother and family and friends. And he eventually realized through multiple interactions. So he started reaching out to the church through letters and learning from the church that there were no immediate plans to organize the church in Nigeria. Um, he still kept going and messaging, sending messages to the church, and kept getting the same answers back. No, we're not coming to Nigeria, or they're not organizing the church in Nigeria. But he kept going, and he was so adamant about this and sharing his experience with community members. And as he was building his testimony, people in his community were sometimes abusing, or he was facing some sort of persecution for sharing his faith, or faith in the belief in the church. But he kept going and bringing his family to teach them this new religious belief that he was starting to build up. And he said if the church could not establish in back Africa, he wanted to live by and share its precepts as closely as possible. Well, the church never sent any missionaries to him or to Nigeria at the time, but they sent church materials like the Book of Mormon and the hymn and different the DNC, Doctrine and Covenants. Obviously, for anyone, this would be so disappointing and potentially faith shattering, but not for Anthony Obinna. He kept persevering, writing letters to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter day Saints. And here is one quote from a letter that he had sent to Salt Lake City from Nigeria. And it reads, when I read through the literature and books that you sent me, there is no reason why you should not come and establish a church here. In the book, Matthew 24:14, Jesus said, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come. It is thus to be seen that nothing seemed to be as important in the sight of the Lord as to preach the kingdom of God. If you say you cannot come and establish churches in Nigeria, what provisions have you made that the gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations? Nigeria is a country in the world, and if any one church has the truth, it is not only necessary that it be taught to the nations, but also to all members of other sects. For we must all come in the unity of the faith. We need salvation as you yourself do, and desire that we may all come to a unity of the faith as one body. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. Man.
Yeah.
I mean, as I listen to that, the thought that comes to my mind is this is someone who is um, experiencing a new faith
Mhm.
for the
Yeah.
first time,
Yeah.
and he's getting a little bit of pushback. And you would think that, if every church, I've heard many times Christians say, it doesn't really matter what church you go to, as long
Mhm.
as you believe in God. But having this strong pull, something saying, no, this is special. This is different.
Yeah.
This is not the same church,
Yeah.
and and then having that willingness to quote scripture
Yeah.
as a way
Yep.
to kind of admonish
Yep.
the leadership of the church to say, hey, how are you following
Yep.
the words of Christ?
Yep.
How are we going to come to a unity of the faith if you're unwilling
Yep.
to send missionaries?
Yep.
And I think that is the kind of faith where, what do you call it? I remember Jesus when I think when, who was it who came to him and he said, are we to give the food to the dogs?
Mhm.
And he says, but even when the master eats, they can get the crumbs.
Yeah.
So this is someone who's like, and Jesus' response to that was, I've never seen this much faith, in all of Israel.
Yeah.
The same kind of thing was happening here. This is a man who's saying, I have the faith that this dream and this church is true.
Yeah.
And now you tell me how you're going to fulfill Christ's mission.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think what's also fascinating is that he knows something is wrong here, right? Like he's fully aware that, hey, something's off, right? Why aren't you here? Why are you not coming to Africa to share the gospel, to baptize? And I want to, I'm going to call you out on that, right? But I love that in the sense that he has his testimony is building. He has his faith, and he knows he's getting that, testimony that this is a true church, and I deserve the true church as well, right? I deserve it. And the Bible says that if I want it, I can get it, right? So bring it. Right. So I find that very, very, very interesting. Great thoughts. The one thing too, it's like, kind of going back to the story, at the same time where he's writing this letter and sends it to Salt Lake City, it's an interesting thing that's happening. So about 1,000 miles, more than 1,000 miles from Nigeria, in Salt Lake City, at a regional representatives seminar, President Kimball is reciting the same quotes to an audience. He's taking the letter that Anthony Obinna had written to Salt Lake City and reciting everything during that seminar. And President Kimball says, we have an obligation, a duty, a divine commission to preach the gospel to every nation. And so interesting, in that crowd, in that seminar, there were two very interesting people that were there, Randall and Rachel Mabey. As an FYI, I think Randall is a descendant or like a grandchild, but related to the former governor of Utah, Governor Mabey. So just as an FYI there, interesting lineage I found out as I was doing some research. So in that crowd, Randall and Rachel Mabey were in there, and they would soon be called to a mission in Africa with Ted and Janet Cannon, and they would come to know intimately the authors of that same letter in Salt Lake City. So I find it also fascinating, right? Like as this story is developing, I look back and the sequence of things that are happening through this whole story of writing the letters to Salt Lake City getting the letters, and then sharing that letters with the members, with leaders of the church, and seeing that, look, there are people in Africa that are yearning for the church, and they're sharing it. And as they're sharing it, there are people in the congregation who will be called to go to Africa as well. And it's just a sequence of events of people being placed in places that, we think it's like a coincidence, but God has a plan, and he's just setting everything up gradually. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's something I love when I hear these stories of pioneers. There are people who look at, what happened with respect to the priesthood and Black people and so on and so forth. They look at that and they look at it unfavorably. And I get where that sentiment comes from, especially within the context of America and America's history. However, when you look at the pioneers in Africa and what God did to prepare people to receive the gospel, I think, when God said, my ways are not your ways, neither are my thoughts your thoughts.
Yeah.
Yes, God might use or leverage tragedy he might leverage unfortunate events, but in his own way, he prepares a way.
Yeah.
As Nephi said, he will prepare a way
Mm-hmm.
to accomplish his work.
Yeah.
And so while, people may be squabbling in Salt Lake or other places about what to do with respect to the priesthood for Black people, God was doing his work in preparing people for the gospel. This did not only happen in Nigeria, it happened in Ghana, it happened in other places, but God knows the end from the beginning, and he prepares the way for his work to be accomplished. And so for me, when I listen to these stories, it tells me you have to have faith in God's plan and God's timing, because even if God can even use our weaknesses as a way to have his work roll forth into the rest of the world.
Yeah. Oh man, I had a personal event that happened in my life, and my wife, I know there was a job I had applied for, and this was sort of like a per diem, like a secondary job that I applied for, and I really wanted to do it because I loved it, and I didn't get the job, and I knew I was highly qualified for this position, and my wife was like, "Why are you devastated that you didn't get this job?" And I told her, I was like, throughout my adult life, my young adult life till now, there's been numerous occasions where I've lost an opportunity and I've seen what was on the other side, and it always panned out. And I said, I'm so mature now in my relationship with God and with Jesus Christ that I know when there's like a setback or quote unquote perceived setback, that something is about to happen. And now when it got turned down, once they denied the position, um I was like, I told my wife, just watch, something is about to happen. I'm gonna get a reason why that was turned down, even though I felt I was really qualified. And then a week later, my job called me and said, "Hey, we need you in Washington D.C. full time." And I was like, "That's it." If I had taken that position, which was just a side job, and which required me to be in Utah, right, in Salt Lake City, and my job now said I need to be in DC, I would have to call them and tell them I can't do it anymore. And then they would have been so far gone in the process and then have to restart everything all over again. And I'm like, that's it. I knew something was going to happen. And it came a week later. And she was like, Emmy, you're just like, I told her, like, there are a lot of things I'm very immature at, but when it comes to just understanding when the timing is right for things, I think my faith is like at 100%. Don't even question me on that one. So I really
That's a beautiful
yeah.
perspective.
Yeah.
I definitely want to be in that kind of mindset. To trust in the Lord and know that his timing is right. He does have a plan. And even though, from an outsider's perspective, you may think that things are not working out. When you look back, you always realize sometimes you get a glimpse into, what is on the other side. And then you realize that, it was all planned.
Yep, absolutely. So kind of going back into this sequence of events. So as we talked about, Elder Maybe, right, eventually gets called to a mission in Africa, right? So his initial the plan for him was he would start off in Nigeria and then move to Ghana next, right? So he is a fully minted missionary, and he goes to Nigeria looking to establish the church and find the man who had been writing these letters, right? And what has been passed by is that the priesthood ban was lifted, and obviously was called to a mission to go right away to Africa to start baptizing and finding these people who had been sending letters to the church. So this is like 13 years in the making since Anthony Obinna began writing these letters to the church. Obinna had already began using the literature sent by the church to set up informal and unauthorized branches of the church. And some of the names were Nigerian Latter-day Saints, LDS, or Missionary Home. And, they had them on, in the buildings, and unauthorized branches, but all the well. And he was teaching the Book of Mormon to people in the church that he set up. So about 9 days after Elder Maybe's arrival in Nigeria on November 18th, 1978, they finally set out to meet Anthony Obinna. And finally, the Maybes met Obinna in a remote village. And Obinna was so excited and was ready to be baptized. He urged the missionaries to begin preparation for baptisms as he had been waiting for 13 years. 13 years he was eager, convinced that the gospel had been restored through the prophet Joseph Smith, built upon the foundation of living prophets who are continually guided by revelation from on high, willing to live the commandments faithfully and understand that the gospel is a complete way of life and not just a religion of convenience. And a few days later, on November 21st, 1978, on a river in his village, the first baptism took place in Black Africa. And for Anthony Obinna, the 13 years of waiting were over. Yeah, wow. When I read the story of Anthony Obinna over and over again, I just see perseverance. I see faith being tried. I don't know who in this world would wait for 13 years. I wouldn't wait. I mean, if you were asking a girl on a date for 13 years, like, and she kept saying no, I think after like probably 2 months, I'll probably go away. Not trying to compare the two, but who would wait 13 years for anything, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think the thought that comes to mind when I think about that is how powerful is the converting power of the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
Think about that for a second. The Bible is available to a lot of people, and probably was available to Anthony. He has read it. He seemed like a religious person. However, the Bible and the Book of Mormon together establish a witness of Jesus Christ that is unshakable. And one of the challenges that I've had with people who, either denigrate the church or, speak against the church is the fact that I've always said a lot of times those people refuse to engage with the Book of Mormon. They refuse to engage with the Book of Mormon. So when I think about someone like Anthony, the thought that comes to mind is, what does it benefit him to make this kind of sacrifice? Like, what does it benefit him to proclaim this gospel? What does it benefit him to go out of his way to establish a church that had not sent missionaries to his country?
Yeah.
Like, why would you have that internal engine to move this work forward if it was not divinely driven, right? Because a lot of people made sacrifices to be part of the church.
Yep.
And so if it was just one of the churches, why would people make these sacrifices? I have had people, I've known people who move into a new area and they say, hey, I'm going church shopping. And they find a church and they're like, I like the pastor. I like how I felt when I went there. And they stick with the church. And tomorrow, if the pastor says something they don't like, they get out and they go to a different church and so on and so forth. And so why would a person be so fixated on joining this particular church? And the answer is only if they're moved by the Spirit. And that is the important thing. The Spirit converts in a way that causes people to make sacrifices for their faith. And that's what was exhibited by Anthony.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think because when I was converted to the church, one of my good friends was a member of the church, and this was back in college. And he was a really great person. Like, he was just a really great role model. And initially freshman year, I met him. He was a senior, and then 10 years later, I knew he was a member of the church. 10 years later, I met up with him again, and I asked him, like, "Hey, what church do you go to?" And he mentioned the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I told him, "Hey, like, I'd love to attend. I'd love to, like, invite me. Like, I'd love to come see what's going on." And he ignores me, like, didn't even respond. And I hit him up a second time, then hit him up a third time. Still ignored me, right? Like, didn't respond back. And then I kept getting that prompt in, right? You need to go figure out what's going on. And then the fourth time I hit him up, and eventually, like, he responded, and we ended up going. I ended up getting converted at the end of the day. But I always look back at that, and at that period in time, that feeling, that prompting that I was getting from the Spirit. And when I eventually got the opportunity to attend the church, to go to sacrament meeting, to the elders quorum and Sunday school, it was just, to me, I just started getting that my testimony was building, and I read the Book of Mormon. When the missionaries told me read the Book of Mormon with real intent, they added that piece. And if they probably didn't say that, I probably would just taken a real good look, breeze through it. But with real intent, like, are you just reading the words, or are you trying to understand what it's saying? And I was reading it with real intent to actually learn. And I did. And I started getting like I started taking away a lot of things from it. And in Nephi, Adam fell, so men might be. One of the first verses, scriptures that I read, and it started making sense about the plan of salvation. Growing up in Africa, like, a lot of the churches that we went to, my parents would always say, man, that Eve, she's, terrible, evil person. If not for her, we wouldn't be all this, we wouldn't be hurting, we wouldn't be this and that. And if you do bad and you die, you go to, you burn in it, all this kind of things to scare you into. And I'm reading the Book of Mormon, and it's sharing the plan of salvation. And I was like, this is different. This is what I have been searching for, and built my testimony. And that was just, to me, I always look back and I'm like, I wish I had the opportunity to go on a mission, and maybe obviously in the future I could. I wish I had the opportunity to grow up with the church, to not go through all the experiences that I had when I was in college. Not that I drank or anything too, a lot or anything, but what if I bypassed all that nonsense, that crazy stage, right? I always think back through it, and but it is what it is, right? And I'm thankful for where I am today. But I'm really thankful for the church, honestly, and it makes me a better person, and I'm grateful for that. So
And I know, I don't know who exactly is going to be listening to this podcast just yet,
yeah,
but the message that I have for people who have questions either about the church, whether you're a member or you're prospecting or you're someone who, has heard things about the church, the bottom line
hmm
is having a personal desire to know the truth. Having a personal desire. I've always told people that this church is the only church where we say, don't take our word for it.
yeah,
We say, you have a special relationship to your Father in heaven. And because you have a special relationship with him, you deserve to know what is true.
hmm
And because he is your Father, he's the same one who said, as a father, in Jesus said, when your child asks you for bread, do you give him a stone? Right?
yeah,
And so the same way, he has an obligation as your Father, the Father of your spirit, to respond when you sincerely ask him. And what I like to tell people is, when you hear real intent,
yeah,
what does that mean? And for me, what it means is committing yourself to what that answer will mean for you.
yeah,
So this is
absolutely,
you submitting your will to God and saying, if you tell me that this is true, I am willing to change my life for you. I am willing to give up the natural man
hmm
for this truth.
yeah,
That is real intent.
yeah.
And so if you feel like,
Well
hey, I
said.
just read, I haven't felt it, whatever the case may be, sometimes it will take time, but you have to have that desire to know the truth. And once you have that desire, commit yourself to what an answer will mean for you.
Yeah.
And once you're that committed to it, then ask. As Moroni said, he didn't say ask if it is true. And that is a small distinction. He didn't say ask God if it is true. Because it's very easy to say, well, I felt good, so I think it is true. Maybe I think I got an answer. But he says, ask God if it is not true.
Mm.
That puts the obligation on God
Yeah.
to correct you. Because God, if you are going into a path that is not right,
Yeah.
God has an obligation, if you ask him, to stop you from pursuing that path. And so he says, ask God if it is not true. And he says, if you will ask with real intent, having faith in Christ, he will manifest the truth of it unto you by the power of the Holy Ghost. He didn't say by some,
Woo.
some power anywhere, but he invokes the Holy Ghost as the power through which you can know that truth.
No, amazing. Yeah, tell him. Tell him. Yeah, so with that, thanks Alma. Thanks so much. You have a very fascinating story as well, and I've gotten to kind of, hang out with you a few times, and I really implore like people to, your story is amazing as well. And you wrote a book as well
I
about.
did.
Yeah.
Last year, I became an author
Yep.
for the first time. This has been a dream of mine.
Yeah.
I set a goal to become an author by the age of 40. And this book was released on my 40th birthday.
Oh wow!
So
Yep.
I achieved that goal.
Yeah.
But basically, in the book, I share my story on how I came to America,
Yeah.
and how that changed my life. So I talk about my relationship with America prior to coming here.
Mhm.
Actually, my mom joined the church in New York. She was an exchange student in New York and joined the church, and she came to Ghana. She joined the church in 1978. She came to Ghana
Wow.
and was one of the pioneers, one of 11 people in Ghana who was a member of the church. And eventually she got married to my dad. He became a member. My dad ended up being one of the first 2 stake presidents who were called when the
Wow.
first
Yeah.
stakes were established in Ghana. And so my parents are pioneers of the church in Ghana. And my love for America and my love for the church and my faith and everything is intertwined. And sharing my story, I felt was necessary, not only to help people understand kind of my journey, but also to help my kids understand, what it took to get where I am today.
Yeah.
And part of that story, talks about my mission experience in Los Angeles. And I talk about my educational experience at BYU and all the way to, my becoming an American citizen in 2021 after 18 years of waiting.
Wow.
So the book is titled My American Privilege, and the subtitle is A Chronicle of My Transatlantic Journey to Become American. So it's available on Amazon. And also, if you want to hear my voice, actually, read the book.
On Audible?
It's also available on Audible as well. So
nice.
you can
Yeah.
go get
No,
it.
I look, I know, I want to, like, your story is really, really fascinating. And I think people will be blessed to read about your story. And, I think there are so many blessings. There are so many, and that's one of the reasons, seriously, that when I was thinking about this podcast, is that we have so many, and not trying to separate us or trying to like divide, or we're this or we're that. We're all one unto Christ. And but there are short stories that need to be highlighted, I think, like just the African story of the members in the church. And and yeah, so I think that's something I please, if readers, listeners, please check it out, listen to it. And is such an interesting story. And it'll be good. It'll be good. Thank you, Alma. I do have a closing statement here that I want to just share with everyone. We can learn a lot from the story of Anthony Obinna. Obinna is a pioneer. He loved the church so much that he waited and waited for God's time. You see, I choose to celebrate the lifting of the priesthood ban. So you look around the internet and you see so many opinions and thoughts about the priesthood ban and why it was instituted, and the different reasons for why the ban may have taken so long to be lifted. Now, look, I'm not here to tell anyone how to feel. However, what I can say is that I love the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and how the church and its teachings make me a better person. I strive to do what's right every day. Some days are more difficult than others, but I know through perseverance, like that shown by Anthony Obinna, I can conquer all through Christ who strengthens me. There are some who look back and choose to focus their time and efforts seeking reasons for why the priesthood restriction. I think that's a wasted effort. I choose and hope people focus their efforts on the opportunities of the future. We are all alike. We are like the next person. The church is doing an amazing job fulfilling its mission here on earth, teaching and preaching the gospel to all nations and all tongues. Take Nigeria, for example. Since Anthony Obinna's baptism, there has been an exponential growth in members. We're seeing temples being built. Our God is merciful, and as President Oaks has said, the plan of our Heavenly Father provides us the freedom to choose and keep the eternal covenants and commandments that apply equally to us. The equality of God is not equal outcomes for all, but equal opportunity for all. End quote. Now let us push against those that try to divide us by race or by ethnicity or by tribe. The Lord said, I say unto you, be one, and if ye are not one, ye are not mine. Let us be one, because we are alike unto God. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day. To all my podcast listeners, I'm so glad you are here. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, like, and share.